Hello everybody, happy Wednesday, welcome back to the channel. Today is going to be things you don't want to know. This one's called Trial by Getting Wanked Off by Strangers. In medieval times, if you married someone and then found out they were an insufferable jerk on a par with Piers Morgan, there weren't many routes to divorce. You were stuck with him forevermore, until one of you put the effort in and finally fucking died. There was, however, one way to get your marriage dissolved, and it was a doozy. For at the time there was no bigger crime for a married couple than not banging. The Lord, who got quite annoyed if you went to Pound Town before the marriage office, was absolutely flabbergasted if, after getting married, you refused to really plough each other. The law in parts of Europe agreed, and so intercourse with your spouse wasn't just encouraged, it was mandatory. If your husband was impotent, you could end the marriage. Proving impotence to a court was even more humiliating than you're picturing in your sick, depraved mind. In England, sometime between December 1433 and February 1434, one William Barton went about proving he could get a boner. He was stripped down and had his dong inspected by physicians, lawyers, and a bunch of other random men and women who were up for it, and had been asked to come in as witnesses, sort of like how a blood spatter analyst may be called in for trial today, but for stiffies. About a dozen women and men testified that he did indeed have a magnum chopper, stating that he appeared sufficient to serve and to please any honest woman, and that it was larger than many of the men's own penises, which must be pleasing to have as a matter of legal record. However, the trials weren't over. As part of the legal proceedings, he was about to get wanked off. The women made the same William remove his clothes down to his vest, sexy, and with cold hands they touched his yard, told it was big, which because of coldness and the women's excessive and rough touching, and yet still on account of embarrassment, the said yard withdrew into his body like a shy tortoise. In the 1440s, John Scathellock was subject to the same test, with several women also showing him their breasts and genitals while giving him medieval dirty talk, of which there is sadly no record, but was probably along the lines of, "Hark, thou art more pleasingly engorged." That technique failed, and they instead turned into mocking him for not getting an erection. In France, up until the Revolution, things were even wilder, and you could go through a trial by Congress where you would show a big room full of witnesses that you could, in fact, do a fuck. Do a fuck. Men who had their marriage dissolved due to impotency, particularly amongst the richer aristocracy who could afford it, were willing to pay the hefty lawyer fees involved to prove that they were potent. Sorry, I just seen the word underneath. This wasn't to win the wife back, like a teddy bear at the do-a-fuck-get-a-wife plush toy stand at the fair, but more to show society that everything was just fine in your pants. As in medieval England, during the trials, the man would be prodded and poked to check whether he could get a hard-on cue, and come on command. The experts waited around a fire. One account of a trial in Reims read, "Many a time did he call out, 'Come, come now,' but it was always a false alarm. The wife laughed and told him, 'Do not hurry so, for I know him well.' The expert said that that never had they laughed as much, nor slept as little as on that night." In one particularly high-profile trial in 1659, Marquis de Langley was accused of being impotent and demanded to have the right to prove he wasn't. In front of a jury of 15 people, including matrons, surgeons and physicians, he attempted unsuccessfully to have sex with his ex-wife, finally giving up after 2 hours despite the clearly very romantic feel to the proceedings. He was mocked throughout France for this, despite not actually being impotent. He went on to have a second wife and 7 children. I'm not saying the test is inaccurate, but if I wanted to get a divorce, even if we'd had loads of sex, I'd fancy my chances that my husband wouldn't get a big old boner in front of a group of court-appointed strangers staring at his penis going, "He sure looks impotent to me. This looks like a man who cannot, for the life of him, get an erection." The end. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and press the wee bell notification. And a huge big thank you to all my subscribers, patrons and members. See you next week. Bye bye.